Autistic people. What is autism really like? Story 1. For me, life can be tough. I often feel lonely and I long for companionship. I love to engage in conversation, but I wish I had more opportunities to do so. I want to work, but I need guidance and support. When I'm upset, I tend to bump into things. It's something I wish I could control. When I'm excited, my arms flap and people tend to stare. Sometimes they stare for other reasons too. Despite these challenges, I find great joy in interacting with children. They love to chat with me, ask me questions, and talk about their favorite cartoons. I would never harm a child, but sometimes their parents act as if I'm a threat, which makes me feel terrible. Fortunately, I've become friends with an amazing girl who shares my love for Legos. We have endless discussions about who the best Disney princess is. I told her about Johnny Thunder, a Lego explorer who ventures into tombs, and she's since developed a fascination with exploration. We also talk about Doctor Who and time travel. In fact, she believes the backseat of her car is a time machine whenever we go on drives. In a nutshell, life with autism can be isolating and emotionally taxing. It feels like being trapped in a body that's only partially functional. Just because people are aware of autism or accept its existence doesn't mean they'll make time for those who have it. I wish I could dress, shower, and care for myself better. I also wish I could travel all by myself. If I could, I'd go out every day. But I've learned that friendships make life a lot easier. Regarding sensory sensitivities, yes, life can be quite overwhelming. I need assistance with dressing. Often, I hide under a pillow to block out the overwhelming stimuli, allowing me to process touch more effectively. Loud noises can be excruciating and anxiety-inducing. I often struggle to follow conversations due to auditory processing difficulties, and especially when surrounded by distractions. Certain forms of touch are particularly uneasy for me. I rely on various self-calming tools, such as ribbons from my bag and a weighted toy turtle filled with sand. Whether you're on the spectrum or not, making friends can be a tough nut to crack. But just like the pizza you ordered, it's definitely worth the wait. Story 2. Social interactions, which come naturally to others, require careful consideration and planning for me. To put it in better terms, I have mental roadmaps for every social scenario imaginable. Obsessions and adherence to rituals are more pronounced for me than for neurotypical individuals. Every night after returning home, I follow a strict routine of dinner and watching The Simpsons without fail. I work as a chef, and I have a special code word, traffic, with my supervisor. If I use this word out of the blue, it means I need a short break to calm down. I'm feeling overwhelmed. To address any potential questions, I'd like to clarify a few points. 1. The kitchen environment can be quite stressful, but I'm fortunate to be a part of a supportive team. Our menu is relatively straightforward, so the stress stems more from the high volume of orders. My supervisor, the head chef, is an awesome guy, and I had the foresight to disclose my autism to him during our first shift together. It's a fairly new establishment, so we've been there since day one. We often hang out outside of work, so we have a good rapport. He's not a pushover though, so I know when it's appropriate to take a break, especially when we're in the. Since opening in mid-October, I've only had to use the code word once. Admittedly, he soon joined me in banging our heads against the door after an exceptionally frustrating encounter with an apprentice. We have a playful dynamic. He calls me Gump, and I poke fun at his misspelled arm tattoo. That sort of thing. 2. Social interactions. When I mention mental checklists, I refer to a rather elaborate internal decision tree. For instance, I'm a regular at my local nightclub, so my checklist might look like this. Friendly security guard. Engage in light banter. Don't be startled by the playful head bump. Unfriendly security guard. Show ID. Don't linger. Quiet bar. Strike up a conversation with a bartender. Ask for a cocktail. Crowded bar. Simply order a drink. Women engrossed in conversation. Leave them undisturbed. Women looking bored, lonely, or smiling at me. Approach and engage in conversation. Attempt a pickup line if appropriate. All of this plays out in a robotic voice in my mind, so it's not at all natural. If my routine is disrupted, I might get a bit moody, but it's not the end of the world. Of course, if I'm away from home or something unexpected arises, I've learned to be flexible, but I stick to my routine as much as possible. Finally, if you have any doubts about whether or not you might be autistic, please consult a professional. A diagnosis can open doors to better understanding and management of your unique experiences. I think that's all for now. Story 3. I have high functioning autism and anxiety, which can make it challenging to maintain friendships. For instance, I moved away from my friends a year and a half ago and haven't spoken to one of them in over a year because I genuinely didn't know how to keep in touch. Communicating with others is also quite difficult for me. It requires much effort, and I often struggle with what to say beyond a simple greeting. Stuttering is also a common occurrence for me. I find changes to my routine very difficult to handle. For example, I tend to eat the same meals and foods each day, and deviating from this pattern can be quite stressful. I also struggle with expressing my emotions. I rarely talk about them unless explicitly prompted, and I'm often oblivious to my own feelings. It's a bit like trying to maintain the concept of left to someone without a point of reference. As a result of these challenges, I currently have no social life. I don't know how to maintain friendships or how to make new ones. My only social interactions happened in school, and I wouldn't even consider those to be close friendships since we never saw each other outside of school. What comes naturally to most people requires a significant amount of effort from me. I often feel like I'm a step behind, not further. At the moment, I would love to be like everyone else and have these things come naturally to me. Overall, I would say that I can feel quite lonely and frustrated when I realize these limitations. Most of the time, I'm fairly content, but even the smallest thing can trigger a change in my mood. I'm working on improving, but it takes a lot of effort for something that seems so simple to most people. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for everyone's kind words, advice, and offers to talk. I will try my best to answer all your questions. Thank you so much. You are all wonderful, and this means a lot to me. I'm amazed by the outpouring of sympathy, offers of friendship, and advice. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. Please remember that I am not a qualified professional and cannot provide diagnosis. If you have concerns about your mental health, it's crucial to seek professional help. A qualified expert can provide a more accurate diagnosis and offer appropriate support and guidance. The common denominator here seems to be the reminders that you need professional support if you plan to get diagnosed. Keep that in mind. Story 4. It's different for everyone. I have Asperger's syndrome, a milder form of autism that affects me more socially than anything else. I live a normal life in that I work full-time and go to university. I don't need or want care or supervision. Here are the ways in which it affects my life. I have my interests and obsessions. I become intensely interested in something for a period of time. My interests tend to last about a year. In the past, I've been fascinated by burlesque, pinup girls, medieval history, motorcycles, and more. I don't really collect things. Instead, I learn as much as I can about current interests and spend a significant amount of time researching them. I struggle with sarcasm and innuendo. I sometimes take things literally and miss the subtler cues that others pick up on. I also don't make facial expressions that match my emotions. I've been told before that I don't look sorry when I apologize, but I genuinely have no idea what a sorry face looks like. However, my friends, all three of them, understand me and know that I'm a terrible liar anyway, so they don't need to worry about my sincerity. I'm also affectionate in my own way. My friends know not to be too huggy and kissy with me, as it makes me super uncomfortable. I like my personal space and am very defensive about it. I can go into sensory overload. This happens in specific circumstances for me. Shopping malls tend to be the perfect storm for triggers. Loud noises, bright lights, people bumping into me, and the general chaos can make it difficult for me to cope. I have a high IQ. I'm aware that doesn't necessarily make me smart per se, but it's a fact. I was tested by my psychologist when I was 19, and my IQ was 143. I process information very quickly and can easily acquire and retain new information. I'm very logical. I don't get lost in fantasy, even with books and movies. If I can't believe it, I can't enjoy it. So I don't enjoy Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and other fantasy works, and some people are surprised by that. I had to learn to filter what I say, and sometimes I still slip up. When I was a kid, I used to say all kinds of inappropriate things to adults. Since I wasn't diagnosed until I was 18, people just thought I was ill-mannered. My psychologist has helped me tremendously, and my mom has been great ever since I received a diagnosis. She even apologized for all the times she scolded me for my behavior as a kid. I used to fidget a lot. Specifically, I used to spin things in circles. Just whatever I was holding. I never got an explanation as to why I did this. I was just told it's common in autistic kids. I would like to say that life is much better for me now than it was as a child. School was literally the worst. There, people pick on anyone that's different, and Australia seems to have this huge anti intellectualism culture. I was bullied horribly for my preference for books over people, but I was suddenly very useful when it came to trivia, assignments, or anything that required thinking. If you have any questions about my experience, please ask away. I'm very open about it and will gladly help you learn more. There's no excuse for bullying. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. If you like my stories that tell what it's like to be different, then hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 5. As a high functioning female on the autism spectrum, I'm also prone to general anxiety and social anxiety. The lines between these conditions are often blurred, and their combined effect can be isolating. For the most part, my autism goes unnoticed. I've become adept at blending in, though it's not always easy. I dropped out of school, but whether this was due to my anxiety's impact on my ability to manage my autism or vice versa remains unclear. Anxiety in its irrationality can be stifling and demanding. After years spent immersed in the virtual world of online gaming, I found employment in the retail sector. I learned to feign interest, maintain eye contact, and tolerate physical contact without completely losing my composure. I even reached a point where I could handle phone conversations. As long as my anxiety was kept in check, I could seamlessly integrate with the neurotypical world. However, when my emotional or physical boundaries are pushed, my autism resurfaces. Twitches, leg bouncing, and difficulty maintaining eye contact become evident. If the pressure persists, I may even resort to headbanging and seeking refuge in quiet, cramped, and dark places. Empathy is a challenge for me. I struggle to connect with others' pain, with the exception of my son, and even then, it's limited to certain situations. Tragic events like car accidents or cancer don't evoke sympathy in me. I can, however, convincingly portray sadness, offering a comforting hand on the shoulder and a listening ear. While I appear empathetic, it's more of a performance, a response I believe is expected. Changes to plans trigger significant agitation. I thrive on predictability, knowing the exact itinerary, destination, mode of transportation, attendees, and even the food and drinks provided. When expectations are disrupted, it feels like my entire day is thrown off course. Adapting to unexpected situations or interacting with strangers without my pre-planned small talk can be overwhelming. Certain sounds make me feel nauseated and as if my ears are bleeding. Cotton balls, velour, and velvet fabrics induce intense tactile aversion. Conversely, I find comfort in the weight of a blanket, even during hot summer nights. I'm considering investing in a weighted blanket for additional comfort. My hobbies tend to fluctuate, but when I find one, I immerse myself deeply and passionately. Over the past 5 years, my aquarium hobby has evolved from a single betta fish in a 10-liter tank to a 550-liter saltwater reef system worth several $1,000s, accompanied by over 20 additional tanks scattered throughout my home. I eventually abandoned this hobby in favor of sewing, and I now possess enough fabric to be buried alive. I'd like to emphasize that every individual's experience is unique. I've learned to navigate life with some adaptations. Maintaining eye contact during conversations was a challenge that I eventually overcame. However, discomfort remains a persistent issue. Nonverbal cues are generally easy to interpret, but occasionally I encounter individuals whose expressions remain indecipherable. Is it sarcasm, anger, or a poker face? Emotions, particularly negative ones, can be more intense for me. Sudden triggers can flip a switch within me. When this happens, I step back, take a breath, and work my way back to a baseline emotional state. Control is another significant issue. Unfamiliar environments, situations with no escape routes, or a lack of knowledge about local norms trigger anxiety. What's considered appropriate behavior? What if I make a mistake? Where can I retreat for a moment of solitude? Traveling is a dream, but the planning process can induce panic. Once I'm there and have identified a safe space, I'm fine. The journey itself is the daunting part. I'm also a perfectionist when it comes to gift giving. I despise surprises, preferring to ascertain the recipient's desires beforehand. I only risk giving a surprise gift if I'm absolutely certain they'll love it. Finally, sensory filters are a constant challenge. Filtering out irrelevant information is an exhausting process, and I'm grateful for my ability to do it, even if it comes at a cost. Clubs, with their overwhelming noise, crowds, and lights, are a sensory nightmare. Conversely, complete silence can also be distracting, as my mind focuses on the background hum. This is why I often listen to soundscapes from where I can customize the auditory environment. Overall, daily life is a constant barrage of sensory input, and I require regular solitude to process and filter out the unnecessary. As long as I avoid intentionally overstimulating environments and prioritize rest, I can manage well. Story 6. I identify as being on the autism spectrum, but I don't experience many of the stereotypical symptoms such as hand flapping, meltdowns, or difficulty coping in social situations. Additionally, this is more common among women with autism or Asperger's. Many of us don't receive a diagnosis until much later in life. This is partially because women are generally thought to be better at masking or hiding their autistic traits and blending in with neurotypical society. Social interaction has always been a challenge for me. As a child, I was often awkward and said things that were embarrassing or cringeworthy, which led to bullying. Now I tend to stay quiet and avoid initiating conversations with new people. The flow of conversation doesn't come naturally to me, and when I do talk, I often struggle to find the right tone, which can sometimes come across as rude or unfriendly. I have to force myself to appear more approachable, but it feels unnatural and makes me even more anxious. Executive function is another area where I face difficulties. The aspect of autism is often overlooked, and I never receive any guidance or support from doctors or therapists. For a long time, I just assumed that I was lazy or disorganized. The stereotype of autism often portrays us as being exceptionally skilled in certain areas, such as mathematics or specific subjects. However, I'm not at all good at math. It simply doesn't make sense to me beyond the very basics, and even then, I often rely on a calculator. Despite my struggles with math, I've always been passionate about creative writing. However, I find it challenging to organize my thoughts and motivate myself to actually write them down. This same struggle extends to everyday tasks like planning meals, choosing outfits, or cleaning my apartment. Organization is a major hurdle for me. Everything seems more complicated than it should be, and I have to break things down into individual steps to avoid feeling overwhelmed. I also have special interests, the most prominent of which is science fiction, particularly Star Wars. I find everything about Star Wars incredibly fascinating. I also experience phases of intense interest in specific topics, which tend to come and go. Another reason I've considered the possibility of bipolar disorder is these phases resemble mania. A few months ago, I was obsessed with collecting dolls and dollhouses, and more recently, I've been exploring Wicca. However, these interests have waned over time. My brain feels like it operates in a very manual way. Things don't come naturally to me, and I rely heavily on notes to stay on track. Currently, I use a bullet journal, which has been quite helpful. It's as if I need to externalize my thoughts and processes to avoid getting lost in a jumble of ideas. Social interactions require a lot of preparation, and I can spend an entire day planning conversations or topics to avoid awkwardness. I also experience symptoms that align with ADHD and bipolar disorder, so I'm still trying to navigate this complex landscape. Unfortunately, the mental health professionals I've consulted tend to attribute these symptoms solely to autism, leaving me with uncertainty. My experiences don't fit neatly into the traditional picture of autism, which makes my mental health quite confusing. It's important to note that you don't have to have the disorder to exhibit some of the symptoms, so crossovers might happen. Story 7. I believe I'm reasonably adept at navigating social situations, but it demands a significant amount of effort. I need to carefully consider every social interaction and often feel overwhelmed afterward. I find it necessary to prepare for social engagements well in advance. Small talk is my nemesis. I experience intense discomfort when people touch me, stand too close, or approach from behind. Recently, I had a mole on my cheek checked out by a doctor I had never met before. The doctor's close examination, which involved touching my face and peering intently at me under the bright lights of the office, pretty much ruined my day by depleting my tolerance for any further interaction. I'm genuinely terrified of people's reactions to me and actively dislike meeting new people because I can't predict their behavior, decipher their interests, or understand their sense of humor. True relaxation for me involves spending time alone in my room, immersing myself in my current obsession. At the moment, it's hockey, and I absolutely love delving into the sport, devouring statistics, team histories, and player profiles. Yeah, man, being stuck in a room with many people can be overwhelming, It's like Professor X tapping using the cerebro and being flooded with many random thoughts. Story 8. My favorite analogy to explain my social experiences is to imagine being in a foreign country where you don't speak the language and they don't speak yours. You have a translation dictionary, but you can't quite grasp the nuances of grammar, accent, and pronunciation. While you might think you're communicating effectively, others might find your speech confusing or disjointed. It's important to note that I'm speaking from my own experience as someone with Asperger's syndrome. The experiences of others on the spectrum will undoubtedly differ. Yes, I might appear to communicate well in writing, but in this environment, I have the luxury of time to carefully consider my response without the pressure of immediate or mandatory replies. I also don't have the added layer of social cues and nonverbal communication to navigate. Additionally, I can recognize when to conclude my thoughts and end my message. Story 9. My struggle lies in being different enough to stand out and feel isolated from others, yet similar enough to recognize this difference and self-loathe for it. Despite being high-functioning, I always felt slightly behind my peers in development, a trait that led to ostracization. When I finally revealed my high-functioning autism to my former friends, they bullied me out of high school, leaving me without a diploma. For the past 7 years, I've isolated myself, making the prospect of forming friendships daunting, as social interaction doesn't come naturally to many on the spectrum. Despite your best efforts, there's always that nagging voice reminding you of your difference, fueling a constant paranoia that others can see through you. This self-deprecation becomes apparent to others, who in turn distance themselves, further reinforcing your sense of being different. The inability to act in a socially acceptable manner, despite knowing the expectations, is the most isolating feeling imaginable. I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone. Story 10. Both social and academic life are difficult for me. I often struggle to grasp the intent of questions, particularly those that delve into an author's motivations or feelings. I tend to interpret these questions differently than intended, leading me to question my understanding of the text. This can be frustrating for my teachers, who may view my numerous questions as a sign of disengagement. However, I simply need more clarity to fully comprehend the task at hand. Socially, I've developed coping mechanisms for my autism. In middle and early high school, I learned to become quiet, but I eventually realized that self-deprecating humor was my forte. By poking fun at myself, I discovered a way to fit in. However, I still miss the nuances of my friends' jokes and opinions. Being different is not something to be ashamed of, man. I'd rather hang out with misfits than those desperately trying to make themselves viral on social media. Hey, if you're still here, I have good news for you. Stick around for people who ran into the weird kid from school years later. How did they turn out? Story 1 was cool. See you there.